Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, an illegal homeowner association set up in my village and demands that I hand over my riverfront property for the benefit of the HOA neighborhood. They fenced off my property and I ended up suing them. Here is what happened. The title story starts like this. I used to live on the outskirts of a rundown city that had seen better days. It was a place where safety was a luxury, criminals and illegal gangs ran rampant, operating with little fear of consequences. Walking through the city meant constantly looking over your shoulder, never quite feeling at ease. It seemed like the authorities had turned a blind eye, or perhaps they were just too corrupt to care. My late mom hailed from a family that once thrived as wealthy farmers. But as the city and its government took a turn for the worse, so did their fortune. The decline in the city's condition mirrored the downfall of my family's once privileged status. The village, which had once bustled with life and prosperity, now stood as little more than a ghost town. Yet, despite the desolation, there was one constant that refused to change: the river. Though the families moved and the lands grew more barren than fertile, the river still provided us all with a way to boat around and catch fish, trading it with the nearby villages to keep the economy flowing. Around 8 years ago, a group of people made a rather audacious decision to settle in a secluded corner of our desolate village. They acquired a cottage that happened to be the largest one around, formerly owned by the corrupt mayor who had hastily fled with his family after being caught in a scandalous weapon smuggling operation. In an unprecedented move, these newcomers established what they called, and what was entirely unfamiliar to us, a homeowners association. The idea of an HOA was as confusing as it was suspicious. In a place where lawlessness and corruption reigned, the idea of this unincorporated and uninsured group attempting to govern the community unsettled many of us. The city had long turned a blind eye to its own illegal activities and no one cared enough to question their lack of oversight. But suddenly, this small group of about 7 individuals took it upon themselves to start wielding authority and demanding financial contributions to supposedly restore our village. Their actions, however, were nothing short of illegal. They had no official status or legal backing, and yet they insisted on having people sign documents and contribute funds under the pretense of community revitalization. While some initially fell prey to their manipulative tactics, others saw through the facade and recognized their true intentions. We quickly started ignoring whatever these clowns had to say about their vision for the city. As time went on, their deceitful practices became more apparent, mismanagement of funds and lack of transparency became the norm. The promised restorations never materialized, though that seemed to be the least surprising aspect of it all. The HOA continued its relentless pursuit of control, finding every opportunity to impose fines and restrictions on me and my mother. Their absurdity reached new heights as they nitpicked over trivial matters such as smoking in our own yard or parking our vehicles on the side of the road. It was as if they were desperately grasping at straws to exert their authority over our lives, regardless of how insignificant these issues truly were. The hypocrisy was staggering. While they were quick to impose penalties for the smallest infractions, they conveniently ignored any and all complaints anyone raised. When we asked the construction of public parking spaces to address the chronic parking issues, their responses were nothing but empty words. They blabbered excuses, evading any responsibility. So much for restoring the village. Months passed in a more or less boring fashion, until finally the HOA decided they were not being holy enough lately. What then happened was, a middle-aged balding man appeared at our doorstep claiming to be the self-proclaimed president of the HOA. His demeanor reeked of arrogance and entitlement as he demanded that we produce legal proof of our ownership of our property. The audacity of this man, with his questionable character and dubious authority, was simply astounding. Though our neighborhood had taken a turn for the worse, we had always maintained proper documentation to substantiate our ownership of both our properties as well as the adjacent jetty. We presented him with the full array of legal documents firmly asserting our rights. You could tell from the old man's face that he had not expected to be bested like this, and having come across people like these, I knew he was not gonna take this defeat quietly. Instead, he started talking about how much he respected people like us who still upheld the law and offered us a place in the HOA, trying to make us join the HOA neighborhood. We obviously and respectfully declined. Though, again, it seemed like this president was not used to being denied like this. He continued to talk about his forefathers or something the like. I honestly only remember it being extremely boring. When his speech ended, my mom dryly turned down his offer yet again before closing the door on his face. But experience told us that it was not the end. And surely, not 2 days later, we were facing the president of the homeowner association again, though today he seemed a lot less in awe of us law-abiding citizens, and instead he started accusing us of hoarding the river access property that the village could use. We calmly told him that we only owned a portion of it, the entirety of the river was free to be used, but that was not what he wanted to hear. Because then he started shaming my mother using words I don't want to ever repeat. What I do want to repeat though is the punch I landed on his wrinkled face and the satisfying crunch I heard against my knuckles. The president with his minions swore to make our lives a living hell, and I legit laughed at the moment because at this point maybe even hell was better than this place. Anyways, he went away cursing and me and my mom decided to go fish. It always helped us calm down after an awful day. We came back to trash littered in front of our property and went inside laughing our asses off. The HOA's pettiness continued to grow and grow, with random acts of vandalism and sometimes even screaming curses from across the road at us. It always made us chuckle because these people really thought that these things would be enough to annoy someone who had seen the fall of their birthplace. But we let them continue because they were nothing more than annoying pests to us at this point. However, it became a problem when both me and my mom had to go away. I had to go attend a friend's baby shower in the nearby village and my mom had to attend a funeral in another village. Pretty poetic if you think about it, but it posed a challenge for us because who knows what the HOA will do if we were not around. So we decided to be cautious and installed the locks my mother had saved and kept in pristine condition over the years. The old kind that worked better than what we had access to and was practically unbreakable. We even asked our neighbor to let 2 of his dogs, I don't know the breed but they were huge and pretty terrifying, be in our yard at night for added security. But despite everything, we both still came back to our property, clearly being trespassed by the HOA. Because the adjacent jetty was now fenced and locked away, no longer accessible to us. Our neighbor informed us that he tried to stop them, but of course he was a single person in front of 8 dumb and crazy people. I told him it was alright and I'll deal with the HOA on my own. However, my neighbor advised that I take this matter to the courts and sue the entirety of the HOA. I obviously didn't think he was serious because, court, really? In this unlawful place? As if. It was then that I heard the words that I still remember to this day. What money-hungry people hate the most are other money-hungry people. So yes, I did go to the court and did sue the HOA, and I did end up winning the lawsuit and getting $172,000. Totally crazy, right? I guess my neighbor was correct and his words were liquid gold. Because when it was revealed that the HOA was stealing and forging documents in the name of the government, they were essentially taking away the black money that should have been taken away by the government. So the officials whose pockets were being picked did what they had the power to do. They fined the HOA and the president to the hell and back. I had not even asked for $172,000, but I was still given that because, well, they couldn't keep that money, right? They just wanted to break the HOA's funds and drain their accounts so the HOA would not be able to operate anymore, and they accomplished exactly that. And I got a sweet fortune out of it, so who am I to complain? Added to people asking if I lived in El Salvador. No, I didn't, but my place could be called El Salvador's little brother. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm curious, what would you do if you lived next to an HOA neighborhood and the HOA crazy busybodies decided to build a fence on your property to essentially lock you out? I swear, these HOAs are getting more and more entitled. Either way, if you like the HOA stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment because that would help me tremendously. The next one is titled, Greedy Relatives Screwed Me Over and I Got Revenge. Now that I came back from the notary about an hour ago, I can finally close this chapter of my life. So here it goes. I would like to start with the fact that I live in Russia and I'm not a good storyteller. And by the way guys, this story is like 7 years old or something, so it has nothing to do with the current events. Anyway, if you have any questions, please let me know, I'll try to clarify. So it all begins about 3 years ago at my grandma's funeral. She passed away at the age of 73, leaving behind 3 sisters, one of which ended her own life a long time ago, a plethora of grandkids and quite a lot of real estate. When the paperwork tsunami regarding inheritance started, something began to smell fishy. My alive aunt was extremely hesitant in giving us the death certificate. This would allow us to start filing for inheritance. Things started to get complicated and confusing, so I had to take over all the paperwork and to help my mother out. I then find out that the apartment my grandmother lived in for some reason no longer belonged to her, but was signed off to the kids of my aunt. Upon further inspection, I realized that most of my grandmother's belongings were signed off to my aunt long before my grandmother's death. First, I decided to speak to my mom. She told me that on the date the papers were signed, my grandmother was already in pretty bad shape. Dementia and Alzheimer's had already gotten the best of her, and she was not legally able to sign them. So then I decided to go to my aunt, still not wanting to believe that she screwed us over. I, sincerely believing that it was all an honest deal, asked her how it all happened. I'll never forget her response. I never thought someone could say this to a relative. She told me that it was none of my business, that she intends to get everything she can, and the rest of the real estate that will be shared property she will force us out of. I was baffled. I couldn't understand how she could do something like this to my mother. I had to do something. The next day I spoke with my mother. She was shocked and devastated, in tears. She also could not understand how her own sister could do such a thing. Especially after all the things she did for her, like helping her make a career in sports, helping with money during hard times, etc. I knew we needed to go to court. The problem with that was that my mother is a working pensioner and is still raising my 13-year-old brother. And I just spent all my savings on renovating her apartment. Money was an issue. Well, luckily I made good friends with our company lawyer at work and he offered to help me. We collected all the needed paperwork and he told me to document any further encounters with their family and to keep an eye out for anything fishy. After that, we sent a letter to my aunt saying that we will dispute everything in court. This is where my life became hell. It all started out with threat calls from her sons. That's no biggie though. I recorded all of the phone conversations. They found out where I work and live and started stalking me. Again, no biggie. A while back my boss made me an offer for a driver to pick me up to and from work, because the driver lived nearby me. About time I hit him up on that offer, so I did. One morning, I wake up and get ready to work. My driver is downstairs waiting for me. I put on a coat and head downstairs. I then open the door to my apartment complex and get hit in the face by my oldest cousin. He threatens me again and flees the scene. The driver runs up, helps me up and tells me that it was all recorded on the car's front camera. Then calls my boss and takes me to the hospital. The next day, I take the video and all of the phone conversations to the police. They accept everything. When the police contacted my aunt searching for her son that punched me, she was livid. She called me and spat threats in the phone. I reminded her that her son is already in trouble for threatening me. She hangs up and about a week later I wake up in the middle of the night from loud banging on my door. As I'm walking to the door, it gives in and flies open. 2 large men walk in, stating this is now their apartment as well. Handing me the papers, they said, "If you want to remain healthy, you should pack your stuff and go." I then call the police. Police comes, checks the paperwork and it's totally fine. It turned out my aunt hired professional, let's call them professional inconveniencers. They make money by forcing people to move out of shared homes. She gave them a part of her right of ownership and they were legally allowed to move in. The next 3 months I routinely had to pick my door because they kept changing the locks. I had to deal with constant loud music, dirt and filth in my own house, and barely any sleep. After 3 months they gave up and left. Seeing that this didn't work, my cousin family decided to desperately F with me. One night, one of them walked into my apartment complex and started spraying pepper spray at my door to try and lure me out. Unfortunately for him, I was cleaning the house and doing some minor work after the goons they hired. All of my doors were pretty insulated with rags and towels to prevent concrete dust flying everywhere. I barely smelled the pepper spray, court was due the next day. I barely convinced my mother to ask for her sister to be eliminated from inheriting anything. After I showed the court video and audio of them threatening and assaulting me, it was finally done. The court ruled in our favor. Upon returning from court, I went to the police to tell them about the pepper spray incident. I was rushed into a room and questioned. It turned out my elderly neighbor died from lung complications caused by the pepper spray. So here I am today, just returned from the notary, where my mother signed all the real estate to her name. I got a significant amount of money for assault and threats, and my piece of crap aunt is left with her tiny apartment and a son in prison for assault, threats of violence and homicide. Her second son was fired from the rescue team and is no longer able to work for any government or social structures. And he does not know how to do anything else. They are bankrupt and it serves them right. Update to the story: there still seems to be confusion about how my aunt got the goons in, so I'll try to explain. Well, basically, you have what's called a right of ownership. Before my grandmother's death, she was the sole holder of the right. After her death and some manipulation from my aunt got about 3/4 of the right of ownership and my mother got 1/4. Now, you can do anything you want with the right, you can sell it, give it away, etc. Anyone holding the right has the legal ability to use the apartment and house. My aunt gave the goons a tiny portion of her right so they could freely and legally enter and live. And yeah, ripe stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this revenge story. This is exactly one of those crazy revenge stories that I would imagine can only happen in Russia. Anyway, the next one is a story from r/amIthejerk, and it is about a restaurant incident. My friend Jack and I, after a long stressful week, like to go to the local pizza place. It's not fine dining by any stretch of the imagination, but there are booths and tables of people sitting down. I see a large table near us of like 10 people, a few couples and a bunch of small kids between like 4 and 8. The kids are running around the restaurant being loud while the adults are drinking wine and eating pizza. I ignore the commotion for like 20 minutes when suddenly I feel like a hand on my leg and one of the little kids is crawling under Jack and my table. I was not thinking and snapped at the kid and said, "Get away from our table!" And the kid ran away and burst into tears. One of the parents at the other table came over and started tearing into me about how cranky and mean I was and how dare I yell at her kid who was just playing. Meanwhile, her and the other middle-aged 40-something parents are letting their kids run amok and be loud and obnoxious while my friend and I are trying to enjoy a night out. I ripped her a new one and said, "How entitled do you need to be to think it's okay to let your kids just crawl under other people's tables?" She called me an a-hole and walked away in a huff. And yeah, ripe stars, let me know what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole for yelling at the kid or not? Personally, I would say OP was definitely not the a-hole, and these parents clearly failed to establish boundaries for their children. And I mean, if you're unable to establish these boundaries, then someone else might scream at your kid. That's just how it is. Anyway, one comment said, "Not the a-hole, her exhaustion, boundaries and parental philosophy create no obligations for you. Your personal space was invaded, you reacted to repair that." Comment number 2, "Not the a-hole, you're not in a jungle gym and your table is not a play space." Comment number 3, "Not the a-hole. People who don't scold their kids should not be surprised when their kids get scolded by strangers, especially if they are just letting their kids go around and invade people's personal space. You did not do anything wrong and the mom and all the rest of those parents are all major a-holes." And the last one is titled, "Am I the a-hole for being a Karen? Went to HOA about solicitation and confrontation. I, 30 female, am not sociable. I hate socializing with people and I prefer to be in my house all the time. I live in a tight-knit neighborhood where there's like 2 barbecue gatherings a month. I never went and everyone knows it. They talk and gossip about me being too uptight to even come out and greet neighbors when I first moved in. I have a no soliciting sign on my door because one of the neighbor's daughters is a door-to-door sales employee. Of course the sign gets ignored and she would ring the doorbell until I am forced to answer or I won't get work done. I have told her many times that I have the sign up, but apparently she doesn't care."
I don't know how she doesn't get in trouble or if there's any repercussions for ignoring the sign as a door-to-door salesperson. I also don't know what company or non-profit she works for, so this last time I resorted to our HOA to do something about her noise disturbance. They said they would look into it, and in the same email mentioned that everyone needs to follow the state's guidelines on social distancing. I didn't think too much about that part until a few days ago. I opened the door to the neighbor's daughter and her mother, screaming at me how I have ruined this week's barbecue gathering. I still don't understand they came up with that, but I told them that I reported the daughter to the HOA and I will report their harassment to the HOA too if they come onto my property again. They said I could have talked to them first because now other neighbors have gotten a hold of the news that I reported her daughter to the HOA. I still hear them talking smack about how I am so passive-aggressive and a coward for the lack of communication. The daughter and mother called me a Karen, and before they left they said I might as well ask for the manager when I decide to get the stick surgically removed from my butt because it is lodged in there. A-hole part, I was so angry, so I also reported the confrontation to the HOA. I should have let it go, but I couldn't. And a user in the comments said, not the a-hole, the daughter should have firstly respected the sign and secondly shouldn't have come back repeatedly. The neighbors sound like a-holes when they are having barbecues in the middle of a pandemic. Your neighbors should also respect that you choose not to be social. The fact that you moved into the community doesn't mean you have to socialize with other people living there. And another user said, not the a-hole, they intentionally harassed you despite the sign, assuming what you said about the continuous ringing being true. This is illegal and should be treated as such. Also, barbecues at this point in time should be wildly frowned upon since it is a lot of people in a small space. You also didn't say anything about social distancing, the HOA did.
And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.